afternoon, everyone. Happy Thursday and welcome to Cohort Thursdays. Today, we're going to have some great conversations. And if you want to talk up today's session on social media, feel free to use the hashtag xAPI Cohort, tag the xAPI Gnome. Today, our presenter is Shelley Blake-Pock, and from Ieee Analytics, and their social media handles are there. So go ahead and tag them in any tweets that you put out there. This is week 7 of a 12-week xAPI cohort. I can't believe we're past the mid-mark. It doesn't feel like we've been in cohort for 7 weeks, but based off of where some of the projects are, it is great to see. We are officially at 591 people registered for the cohort this semester. Today, during our conversation, we'll be talking about xAPI standards at work at IEEE, what's going on and what that means. And we have Shelley Blake-Pock. We'll go ahead and give a wave right there at the bottom with me. That's going to present out that. And then after our presenter, we'll have our team check-ins. So if you are a presenter from your team, please share which team you'll be representing in the chat now so that our producers can be ready to call you up. So I see you, Kieran. Behind the mics today, as always, you have me. I am the xAPI cohort host. I'm Jess. We also have Aaron, who is a producer, and Jamie, who is a producer. So if you have any tech issues or needs, you can go ahead and ask Jamie or Aaron. In terms of where we are this semester, so we always begin broad, high level, giving an overview of what xAPI is, what you can do with it. Then we get more nitty gritty. And we've talked about statements, and profiles. We've talked about high-level overview of what to do with learning analytics, and today we're going to talk about standards at work. Next week, we'll move into creating dashboards and visualizations with data, and then we'll have some case studies where we see real-life applications of using xAPI. Our final 2 weeks will be project team demos, and I'll be taking signups beginning that last week in March, that first week in April. So think about when your team can feasibly present out. And I also want to normalize that presenting out does not mean that you need to have a perfect project or even finished project. It's an opportunity to talk about the work that you're doing, get some feedback and some advice as well. All right, with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Shelley, to talk about xAPI standards at work at IEEE, what's going on, and what does that even mean? And I think you're muted, Shelley. Shelley, can you hear me okay? Okay. Is your mic not coming off mute?
There we go.
Okay. There you go.
All right. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Can you see my page now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so first off, thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to chat about xAPI standardization today. Just a little bit about my background and what I'm doing here. I run a team over at Ieee Analytics. We've been in the xAPI space for a long time. And among the things that we do is our team serves on several working groups, committees related to data standards in the space. And among those, Probably the ones that we spend the most time on are standards that are put together through the IEEE Standards Association. So a little bit of background to begin with, like what are standards? Why is this relevant to us and to xAPI at all? The Standards Association works to create common technical documents and agreements so that technologies can be interoperable, that they can be globally distributed, that they can be safe, and that they can be effective. So if you think about maybe some standards that have an impact on your lives every day that otherwise you wouldn't really think about, things like Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is actually an IEEE standard, and it governs the way that communications happen over wireless, so that when you get a phone and turn it on, you can connect to the Wi-Fi wherever you are, wherever the Wi-Fi is. So in the same way that there are standards for Wi-Fi and standards for everything from autonomous vehicles to nuclear power plants, there are standards for learning technologies. At the IEEE, those standards fall under the governance of the Learning Technology Standards Committee. Often you'll hear this referred to as the LTSC. And the LTSC runs several work groups, technical advisory groups, and study groups, all dedicated to different aspects of data and technology that are either being standardized within the IEEE or that are being considered for standardization within the IEEE. So down here under these work groups, you can see the types of activities that we engage in. I've been an officer with LTSC for the last, I guess, 4 years. And the work that's done in the work groups is both diverse and represents the whole range of things touching learning technology today. So everything from student data governance to augmented reality to AI and adaptive instructional systems to mobile learning platforms, competency frameworks, and xAPI. xAPI is one of the standards activities within the LTSC. So to give you an idea of how the standards process works, I'm borrowing this from a presentation that was given 2 or 3 years ago at an NDIA event. And if we just go from left to right up top here, so an idea for a standard may come into the IEEE through a study group. So a study group is, right now, for instance, there's a study group for enterprise learner records where the interest came from a number of stakeholders, in this case, mostly in government, who wanted to talk together about metadata in learning and training. And they formed a study group at the LTSC, and that study group then is deciding whether to formalize its work. And to formalize it, what the study group does is it creates what's called a PAR, which is a project authorization request. This is a document that lays out what it is that standards activity would actually do. So moving from a study group where we're talking about the idea into actually formally drafting a standard. So that that project authorization request, needs a sponsor. The sponsor for learning standards is the LTSC. If the LTSC agrees to sponsor that project, the authorization request is then sent to the Standards Association NESCOM, the new standards committee. NESCOM looks at the standards or the project request. They may ask questions, and eventually they then will confirm upon a vote that this can become a formal working group. So now we've moved from the proposal phase to the working group phase. The working group has a chair and elected officers, and it's up to them to work with the community to draft the standard. The standard then will go through several months of drafting and editing. In the case of xAPI, as an example, it's taken about 2 years to get the draft into a form now where it's ready to submit for voting. So it goes to what's called a balloting committee. And the balloting committee looks at the standard and decides whether it is ready for a formal vote as to whether it should become an IEEE standard. The balloting committee then puts it out to a vote among eligible members who submit their own ballots and can make comments. For example, I could say, I am not going to vote for this to be approved because X, Y, or Z would need to be updated or fixed or edited before it would get my approval. The balloting committee then looks at all the votes, tallies up whether or not it passes, and if it passes, whether or not needs have to be addressed. It then formally goes before what's called the review committee. From the review committee, it's passed on to the standards board itself for official acceptance. And with a stamp of approval of the standards board, it then can become an official IEEE publication. That entire process from idea to publication takes a long time, all things considered. In the case of xAPI, it will have probably taken about 3 years by the time it was proposed that this come into IEEE to when the final standard publication will be completed. One of the things that that long process ensures is that the standard is fair, it's accurate, its writing cannot be dominated by one party who may have some ulterior interest in getting the standard to look a certain way. It's been through lots of hands, lots of reviews. It's been through voting. It's been looked at by experts across different fields, and then finally is approved for publication. So ADL, who you know of as the organization that created and has shepherded xAPI as a data specification, formally agreed to and helped to begin the work at IEEE back in 2017, loosely. It formally started coming into development with a project authorization request about a year or a little bit longer after that. And that puts us at the state that we're in currently. So what does this work actually look like at the IEEE? All activities at the IEEE are given a 4-digit number to identify them. xAPI is 9274. Incidentally, as a bit of trivia, 9274, it was given that because on an old touch-tone phone that spells out xAPI. xAPI. The P before it means that it is in the project phase, so it has not yet received all the approvals to be formally published. So xAPI is in the project phase. This is its number. You'll note here that the name of this project does not include xAPI. The formal name of the activity within IEEE is the JavaScript Object Notation Data Model Format and Representational State Transfer Web Service for Learner Experience Data Tracking and Access, otherwise known as xAPI. So the project itself, you see it says 1.1. We'll talk about this in a moment, but basically what happens is the working group made a decision on how the project would be put together so it could grow over time. So 1.1 represents the base technical specification. And then there are 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, which we'll talk about, are other pieces of this standards, sort of a portfolio within a standards suite, all related to xAPI. Down here, some project details. You can see that it was approved. It was approved back in 2018. It's under the Learning Technology Standards Committee. And then it tells you some information about the projects within the group. I should note that all IEEE activity is public and free and open to the public to get involved. So if you are interested in technical standards, technical writing, or just have a general interest in following what's going on, the program is free and open to the public. We meet via a web call every Tuesday at 2:30 Eastern. Now, so let's dig in a little bit more. So, as I said, this is the 9274 base standard. The base standard is what we know of altogether as the xAPI data specification from ADL. However, that specification has been updated in several ways. So what I'll do is show you this. So this is the original and existing xAPI specification that is hosted by ADL on GitHub. You can see the three parts of the spec. Part 1 is about. Part 2 shows us the xAPI data model. And part 3 is about the communications, the processing, validation, and security of the data. Now, what's happened is that over the last 2 years, the working group went in and took a fine-tooth comb to the original xAPI specification and updated as was necessary to sort of the modern, what will be the modern standard. There are some things that have changed. For instance, I won't go too technical, but in the xAPI specification, there are so in any standard, you'll have normative vocabulary. So something will say this shall occur, which means that in order to follow the standard, it must occur. Something should occur, which means to follow the standard, it should follow that guideline, although there may be exceptions to the rule. And then it may follow the guidelines. So in some standards where you have, it says this may occur, it is allowable, it is permissible, but it is not the hard fast rule that it must happen. So shall, should, and may. In the xAPI specification, if you've looked through it, there are what are called should stars, and these are represented by the word should with an asterisk next to it. Should stars are a way that it was essentially like falling into a middle ground between telling developers what should happen, have the weight of this should take place, and between that and what shall happen, what must take place. There were things where, for one reason or another, it was agreed that the community did not want to enforce them as a must, but pretty darn close. So this should star was used. Well, should stars cannot be used in IEEE standards. So one of the things that the working group did was went in and had to debate each of the should stars in the specification and decide whether they should become shalls in the final IEEE standard. When that happens, there is what is considered a breaking change, because LRSs that decided not to follow the full weight of the should star and make it a shall, but were following the letter of the law when it came to the xAPI specification, those LRSs could break given the change that happens in the IEEE standard. Therefore, one of the things that occurred within the working group is we reached out to all of the LRS vendors and all of the people doing research with LRSs and said, in order to be conformant to the new standard, we have decided that these are the breaking changes, and we want you all to agree to update your LRSs so that your LRSs don't break, so that your LRSs follow the new IEEE standard. So now, as we're coming down to the wire for the final votes coming through on the standard itself, LRS vendors and LRS researchers are doing the work to update their LRSs to conform with those new standards. The new standard itself is just like the original xAPI specification, delivered open source. It is licensed Apache 2.0 and is it will be made available in the IEEE GitLab. You'll see that it looks a little bit different than the original spec, but it has all the same information. The overview looks very similar, including sort of the scope and purpose. In IEEE standards, you have normative references. This is part of the standards process, which allows you to say, when we talk about X, Y, or Z, these are the other external existing standards that this work is referencing. And likewise, all of the work with LRSs describing how LRSs work, how LRSs communicate, and then all of the technical content. That's all in the new standard. What you're looking at here is the current state of the draft. This draft has been submitted for balloting. The balloting committee is now looking at this document and deciding whether to put it up for the vote. If they agree to put it up for the vote, then a ballot will be sent out to all eligible members. That vote will be taken, and then it'll continue down the standards process, eventually this document becoming the formal published IEEE standard. Now, within that 9274 suite, that working group is actually working on more than just the base standard. So point 1 is the base standard. That is taking the xAPI specification and turning it into the IEEE standard. The point 2 is for xAPI profiles. So xAPI profiles is a specification that augments xAPI. It is also hosted by ADL, and it provides the ability to model xAPI data according to domain-specific vocabulary, patterns, sequences, and concepts. The xAPI profile has been a project authorization request has been submitted for formal working group to be created to do this work as point 2 in this suite of standards. And that will define the baseline xAPI profile. Point 3 will be individual profiles. So if you've worked with profiles currently, I'll take, for example, the video profile. We want to use this to track the use of clicks on video. We can implement the video profile. That video profile represents one usage of xAPI profiles. Therefore, the video profile, if that were to go into IEEE, it would go under point 3. So you might have 3.1 is the video profile. 3.2 is the next generation of CMI5. 3.3 is ADL's master object model profile, etc. And that could go on forever. There's no limit to how many profiles could be created. But the point 3 then allows us the ability to standardize those profiles formally within IEEE. One that I'm working on currently with a team is a profile for intelligent tutors. So eventually, once the xAPI profile standard is approved, then we'll be able to submit a PAR for the intelligent tutor xAPI profile. That would go under point 3. Lastly is point 4. Point 4 are recommended practices. So we have 2 existing recommended practices. that are approved as formal standards activity. The first one is on xAPI implementation, and that is based on work that was done by the technical advisory group on xAPI back in 2018. In 2018, we published a guide for technical implementers. It's available for free for anyone to view at tagxapi.org. That report, which I'm showing here, is pretty substantial. It's about 50 pages long and talks about all aspects of how to implement xAPI. So what we're going to do within this point 4 working group is we're going to take that document, format it, and update it to IEEE standard requirements, and then go through the process of getting that approved. So there'll be like a standard best practices guide to implementing xAPI. We're also doing one for cybersecurity. So right now, one of the working groups is recommended practice for cybersecurity in the implementation of xAPI. And here, this is a live document. It's in draft, so you can see the type of work that we're doing. So you can see that when a standard is created, you start with the scope and the purpose. Then you define, so you have normative references. These are references to other standards and academic work that's been done in the space. And then definitions that are specific to the work that you're doing. So standards are very, a lot of it is about really tightly defining the work, the words that you're using in the documents. I guess in that way, it might be sort of equivalent to like legal language, where a contract may start with legal definitions that are going to be used in the contract. Then after all that work on the definitions, you have a section where you actually lay out the standard itself. In this case, this is for cybersecurity requirements with xAPI. And then you have, in this case, you have use cases. So we know here's the standard itself. This is how to implement cybersecurity. And then here are actual use cases that demonstrate what it looks like in the real world. This group meets monthly. And you can see here that sort of the way it works, we go through and have conversations within the comments of the document. And then once a month, we get together online and argue and debate the comments that came up the previous month, ultimately resulting in the ability to come to consensus as a group as to the precise language that should be included in the standard, so that we can then submit the final draft to the LTSC for a review, and then it goes on down the chain. All of the documents for the xAPI group at LTSC are open to the public. You can review anything that's been done in the group, including all the minutes and agendas, as well as policies and procedures for the working group. It's very important from a governance standpoint that everything in IEEE is done transparently. That's what I would consider a differentiator between the work at IEEE and some of the other standards bodies in the learning technology space. While some organizations promote open and transparent creation of standards, other organizations do it closed off within committees that require certain memberships to get into. There are pros and cons of either approach, but the approach of the IEEE is that everything is done open and publicly, and everything be transparent. I personally like working that way. And then on the xAPI standards specifically, these are all done as formal open source activities with the IEEE. All contributors sign off on these open source licenses, both for individuals and for the organizations that they represent, to keep everything above board and to make sure that by the time the standard is approved, that there are no conflicts of interest.
So, have one question that.
Yeah, with that, I'm completely open to questions.
We have a question that came through from Izzy. Is there anything out there regarding cybersecurity, FedRAMP approval, and using xAPI in government training? Just thinking about this after seeing that cyber aspect.
Yeah, so in the case of the government has a wide range of options as to how to provide an ATO, or an authorization to operate, for any technology that it acquires. That may include something like FedRAMP, as is mentioned. FedRAMP, however, is only one of several possible ways that an authorization to operate may be acquired. The approach within the xAPI cybersecurity standard is not to speak to specific paths to cybersecurity certification, such as FedRAMP or PHMSA, but rather to speak to general best practices in the handling of API communications, which can be applied to any such scenario, certification, implementation. The standards, often a good standard will provide highly specific information about highly generalized, something that can be generalizable to a domain. So, short story, it will not give direct guidance on FedRAMP, but it will give best practices which would be expected as table stakes if we did something like pursued FedRAMP for a cloud-based LRS.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm not seeing any additional questions, and that question did come from Ismail Nava, not Izzy Lara. Sorry, Izzy. All right. If we don't have any questions coming through, give a few more seconds in case folks have any questions for Shelly. I do want to thank you for being here today and talking to us about all of what's going on with profiles and different standards at work. And we'll hop right into lots of folks getting lots of positive feedback in the chat about how helpful the conversation was today. So thank you so much, Shelly.
Sure thing. Thank you all. And as we said earlier. All this is open to the public. If you have an interest in getting involved, feel free to reach out to me directly, either via email or at Blake-Pock on Twitter, and I will point you in the right direction.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to hop into some team updates. As you know, we are in week 7, so folks are in the nitty-gritty, digging into details, doing and assigning tasks, in the hopes that in the next couple of weeks you'll be ready to apply, have some next steps, and demo out. So let's hop into team updates using GitHub, and I have all the folks that want to share out. And our first team is going to be Rachel with Team A-Rise.
Thanks, Jess. So the team met a couple of weeks ago. Can you hear me okay? I'm sorry. Oh, thanks.
You sound great.
Awesome. So the team met a couple of weeks ago. We've only met once. Jess, Joe, Adelia, we had a really good conversation about what the project is. There's 2 teams running concurrently. My team at work that is creating the content. So the organization I work for, and we've put a prototype out to our stakeholders on that. So I'll share that link to our team so that they can see it, what's going on with that. From an xAPI standpoint, I need a mentor. I'll just put that out there. I'm very lost on how to navigate xAPI Cohort, the tools, xAPI in general. Like I feel like I don't know how to move forward. I know my brain bandwidth is low because I'm about to defend my dissertation. I just don't have a lot of brain space right now, but I need a mentor, like someone to slap me in the face and say, no, Rachel, do this. So if anyone's willing to do that, reach out to me on the Slack.
Awesome. Thank you. Miranda for Team Goodish.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, you sound great.
All right, thank you, Jess. One day, did it update properly? Heck yes. Okay. Our accomplishments for this last week, we had another team meeting last Friday. A ton of team members showed up and we looked through our content, reacted to it. We're refining it a little further. We had volunteers pick up for certain questions and feedback that weren't spoken for. So we're still working on content, but we hope to be absolutely done with draft day tomorrow. And we're going to plug it all into a prototype. No support needed at the moment, but we're going to try to accomplish all the things we meant to, we attempted to accomplish them last week, but some of those are going to pour over into this week, namely getting into the xAPI part of it, talking about statements, where it will live, how it will be launched, and the fun stuff. It's getting fun. So stay tuned.
I'm glad it's getting fun. All right, we have Brian with Team Slack.
Hello.
Hello.
We had our team meeting yesterday afternoon and set up a couple of Zapier connections between our Sandbox Slack instance and our Watershed LRS, and got those working and had a few statements sent, which is awesome. We took that meeting to walk through how I built those out, how each of the fields within Slack are mapped to items within the xAPI statement, just to make sure that everybody was on the same page, have a recording of that. Next week, we're going to take a look at somebody in Cohort, I think a year ago, put together a Slack to xAPI connector, which is available on GitHub. We haven't had a chance to explore that yet, so we're going to use our meeting next Wednesday afternoon as a working session to hopefully install that Slack connector, get it set up, find out if there are any hurdles that we need to overcome, start to document that kind of stuff, and figure that out. So that's kind of our next step, is looking at a scalable solution that doesn't use Zapier, and yeah, so we're going to be building that out next week.
Awesome, thank you. We have Kieran with Team Visualize Learner Behavior. Not hearing you come through, Kieran. So we can, while we work through the audio this time around, do we want to hop to Brian with Team xAPI Live Code? Is that Kieran or Brian?
It's Brian Duck.
Okay, I hear you, Brian. Go ahead.
Team xAPI and Live Code, sorry. Accomplishments for the week include our meeting yesterday, and that is currently being uploaded into YouTube. So the URL is on the discussion for the GitHub, but it may not be active right this moment. It may take till the end of the session to get that processed. Our agenda for the meeting was updates for the projects that are underway and next steps. So there are currently 2 different prototypes, if you will, of live code projects as a learning record provider. And we expect to wrap at least one of those up in the next week. Part of that discussion is further down in the agenda, but it will include elaboration of the video profile and displaying a PDF as a profile. So that shows up under Part 2 projects. We also discussed open items from last week, or new items from the team. And I'm going to jump a little further down now. Introduction to live code is a session we are planning where we can, for anyone who's interested in the xAPI cohort, it's designed for our team members, but it's open to anybody in the cohort. The idea would be to walk through the functionality of live code, talk about the user interface elements, and get people familiar with the object-oriented approach for putting in code, using the integrated development environment, or IDE, for live code, and then using or adding some content into the prototypes that we're talking through. Our agenda yesterday also include a review of the goals for our team. Those are always open to discussion. And what we hope to accomplish next week, I've sort of alluded to this, we're planning our introduction to live code. It may be held as a separate session or part of the Wednesday 3:30 weekly meeting. So I'll put some links out in Slack, in the main channel, and in our team Slack to let people know, or put in a when to meet session URL in Slack so people can tell me when they're available and we can set up that session. And as I mentioned, we're talking about updates to the baseline, elaboration of video and PDF, and then we want to be able to get people ready with the introduction to live code session and the baseline to begin adding content to one of those and start we're calling our phase 2 projects. So that's it from Team xAPI and live code.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Kieran, do you want to try one more time for sound?
Yeah,
We
can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, I'm so excited.
You got it.
Hooray, computers suck. Okay, we're going pretty well. We started with some questions about a particular course. We wanted to know about how students, how they're working with the material. And we've gone through all the steps, and now we have programs that are actually downloading data from our LRS to answer those questions. So the data is converted to CSV files for easy use with Excel and other things. And if you're interested in messing with data in Excel, you can download a worksheet from our last update in our GitHub group, and you can go ahead and mess around and see what you can find out. And there'll be more files over the next few days coming along. This is all based on live data from a real course. So we're pretty much ready to close the loop and create some recommendations for the course itself.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And then I think we had Judy with Team Pebble. Judy, I think you have to go.
Sorry.
There you go.
All right. It's like a different interface every day because different tools. Anyway, Team Pebble, basically what we are doing, I'm not sure that we've done an update yet, but we are basically working on a project to create something small, a prototype, launch it out to this group and whatever other groups we can get to participate, and play with the data, see what we can do with it, see what insights we can gain. The authoring aspect is going to be a lot easier this time because we're working on the beta of the actual authoring tool. And we're using content from the CDC because they have a zombie preparedness course already with content out there that's public domain that we can use. So right now we're in the process of storyboarding that. We're planning to make a very rapid storyboard to development to launch. And so hopefully we will have that out within the next couple of weeks, and we'll be putting the link out for people and asking for people to take it and generate data for us.
Awesome. Thank you, Judy. And if you have interest in any of the teams that talked today, I want to just put a plug that you can find them all in Slack, right? So Pebble has a team that you can join, and all of our teams are in Slack. And I also wanted to do a quick demo that if you're looking for ways to join your team's GitHub, you can click on these, hover over any message, right? So this is Judy asking if anybody wants to report out. Hover over the more actions, join cohort GitHub. I'm already a member of GitHub, so it might not work, but that is the tool that will help you kind of get into GitHub. With that, I'm going to go back to our presentation. All right, and just remind everyone that on May 14th, we have the xAPI party and the L&D download. This is our 14th xAPI party and 16th L&D download. There are multiple tracks and different sessions. We have different demos. We have lots of folks sharing out what they're learning. This is a great space. Our call for proposals is open and it's sent out in the weekly update. And registration is now open on our website, on our xAPI cohort website. So you can sign up to attend as an attendee by registering, or you can submit a proposal to present. And I know the person who evaluates proposals, and they have a bias towards cohort members. So if you want to present from cohort, the chances are you'll get a slot. And again, I want to remind you, when you're presenting out on your work, it doesn't need to be perfect. This is an opportunity to share, get feedback, and learn. And demos don't need to be complete and perfect. Some good things to know is that next week we'll be talking about creating dashboards and visualizations with xAPI data with Rob Chaddick. Our meetings are here each week at 2:00 p.m. Eastern, or you can catch the recordings. And we realize that our timing for the party might not accommodate all global time zones, but all of the sessions will be recorded and available afterward for those who register. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns about what's going on in cohort, feel free to message me, Jess, in Slack, or send an email to our help desk. With that, continue to get out there and make things. And I do have one song today from Lady Day, Billie Holiday herself. I don't know if you all have watched the documentary on Hulu about her life, but I have, and she actually is my introduction to jazz. I took a class at U of M and learned about Strange Fruit and some of the lyrics there, but I'm going to play I'll Be Seeing You, which was used by NASA on their soundtrack to space exploration. So I'll be seeing you next week.